This is a special panel for a lot of reasons. I just want to mention that I had an extremely wonderful experience this summer in Maine at the Seeds of Peace camp for a weekend. Seeds of Peace is a nonprofit organization that's going into its 25th anniversary year. The camp is one part of what they do, and it's a beautiful part. They bring together young teens primarily, also some elders, but primarily young teens from conflict zones, Israel, Palestine, India, Pakistan, and elsewhere. And their focus is really on a unique dialogue that lets these young people get to justice issues and conflict resolution. And the product of it you are going to witness today. We have 4 alums, Doron Shapir from Israel, who attended Seeds of Peace in 2008. Mahmoud Jabari, a Fletcher school student at Tufts, who attended in 2007. Tunkel, who is a 1993 alum, now a senior vice president at APCO worldwide. And Tamer Nagy Mahmoud, who is an associate at White & Case and 1991. Our moderator is Sarah Wildman. She is a journalist whose work has appeared in New Yorker Online, Slate, and a number of other publications. She has a book out, Paper Love, which is a history and memoir, which I encourage you to purchase outside after the panel. And Sarah is now the Global Identities and Borders writer for Vox. Seeds of Peace.
So we're really fortunate that we have the breadth of people here today that we have, because we actually have alum of Seeds of Peace who span the lifetime of the program. And the program began in '93 at a time of great hope in the region. It was just before the Oslo Accords were signed. In fact, this first group, and I'm going to have Tamer speak to us about this a little bit, actually got to go to the signing of the Oslo Peace Accords with Clinton as guests of Clinton. But a lot has changed in the region. And right now, we're going to focus on this panel on Seeds and the Israel-Palestine conflict and the regional conflict. Obviously, Tamer's Egyptian, not from Israel or Palestine exactly. But Seeds itself actually encompasses conflict resolution in a number of countries. How do we incubate the next generation of leaders who will be the people who can generate change? And at a time when there is a lot of hopelessness, this is something that is really essential. And it's not just about creating hope and creating leaders, it's also about creating human interaction. And if you speak ever to negotiators, they often say that the one clue is actually finding the humanity within the other, quote unquote, or the so-called enemy. And the region has actually disintegrated in terms of personal interaction. There are fewer and fewer day-to-day interactions that take place because of the way the conflict has played out, because of the leadership. And so organizations like Seeds take on a very different role. So I really want to start with I'm going to go I was not going to say age, in alum order, so that we can learn a little bit both about the backgrounds of each of these panelists, where, first of all, you should know that Seeds alum are uniquely accomplished. They are among the most fantastic members of each of their societies. They are people who are doing amazing things all on their very own. And then on the side, or in addition, they're working to better the world around them, not just their own homes or their own backyards. But I want to start with Tamer, who was in the Egyptian delegation in '93, which is only the smallest piece of an amazing biography, which he is a lawyer at White & Case here in DC, right? Yes. But he also worked on the Egyptian constitution in 2011 to 2013, and that's even only, again, a little sliver. So I want to actually have you start by first of all telling us what it meant to take the risk of going to something that didn't exist before you started it, and what it meant to go and why you went. And I want each of you to actually look at that, because it changes over time. As the conflict progresses, the decision to leave has each year been its own kind of interesting question, but each of us go into it differently. So if you can start.
Sure. First of all, thank you for having us here. Yes, the first year of '93 was a bit interesting because there was no Seeds of Peace before that to know what it is that we're signing up to go to. And the way it was set up was that it was basically, you had about 15 kids from Egypt, 15 from Palestine, 15 from Israel, to come to a program in Maine where you are going to meet people from the enemy side. That is all we really knew. For an Egyptian growing up, in Egypt, you don't really get to meet Israelis. The only Israelis you hear about are the ones that you see in the media. You usually see soldiers on the news or politicians making statements that you're not too fond of. So you live your whole life kind of painting a particular stereotypes of what Israelis are like. So when I heard about the opportunity to go to camp, it was something interesting that you'd meet somebody face to face and get to form your own opinion. But you also think in your head, I'm going to go to explain to them my side of the story, explain to them why they've been wrong all along. And so we went basically knowing very little about what camp is about. But when we went, the way it was structured, it was made, in some ways, it was very similar to any summer camp that you would go to here in the States. It was set up in Maine on a beautiful lake called Pleasant Lake, very appropriately named. And you basically spend the day doing summer camp-like activities, soccer and canoeing and arts and crafts and computer and you name it. But you also share your bunk with people from all of the different delegations. You sit at a table with people from all of the different delegations. You do activities and talent shows and everything, always in mixed groups. But you also sit every day for about a 2-hour session for what we call coexistence sessions, where we break up the camp into small groups of about 10 or 12 people with a professional facilitator to actually start discussing the political issues. So it's not just brushed aside. So the whole concept is that you meet someone for the first time and give the enemy a face, so to speak. And John Wallach, the founder of the program, who has since passed away, used to always say, make one friend from the other side. And we used to always say, that's kind of silly. That's kind of, what is that really going to do, one friend? But sure enough, when you make one friend from the other side, you start to make another and another and another, and now we have many more friends. And the whole camp was just a truly life-changing experience. I know we're going to be talking about it more throughout the session, but I'll just end by saying that at the end of the session, the crowning jewel, so to speak, was after having gone through this amazing experience, it so happened that there was the signing ceremony for the Oslo Accords, and we got invited to go attend in the White House. And that was a great hope for a new beginning, a great way to end the program and hope for a new beginning for what's going to come afterwards. So
That's a great way to start. Can you hear me? So we're going to move to Anna, and Anna is the Senior Director of Lead Strategic Initiatives for the Office and Founder and Chairman of APCO. You're going to have to explain more about what that means. And she also speaks 5 languages fluently and has worked all over the world, including in Shanghai. So this is a piece of the puzzle for her life, but not the only one. But both of you started in the 90s. You're 95. And I want to look a little bit about what it meant to pick up the reins in 95, when obviously Oslo feels like it's still really possible. It feels like peace is on the horizon, that everything is, the forward momentum is moving forward, but and that, you know, there is, in fact, if anything, you know, the horizon feels very open. I mean, remember, you could start to, freedom of movement had changed in the region. You could move back and forth between the West Bank and Israel. You could move to Jordan. You could cross over into these regions in ways that you couldn't in the past. But there's something that's a little different from what happens for those who come in the most recent decade, which is that we don't have Facebook. Email is very new. We don't have the same social media crutches that we have now that allow us to feel that we're linking to people. So actually, these relationships take on a more concrete meaning in a different way. So talk to me a little bit about that and what it felt like to enter camp in the second year or third year. It's the second year of camp.
Sure. So, in case you're wondering about my complex accent, I was born in Russia, raised in Israel. I went to high school in India, and then, as Sarah mentioned, had an amazing opportunity to work in Geneva, but then Shanghai, Beijing, and I'm currently based in New York. And I work for a global consulting company called APCO Worldwide, and I lead our external partnerships and a number of consulting projects. So I was actually the second generation of girls post Seeds of Peace, because in 1993, Tamer was the experimental batch. So they only sent a small group of boys. In 1994, they added a small group of girls. And 1995 was, I think, a first joint session. It was really, eye-opening and life-changing for me, actually, because for me, Seeds of Peace since 1995, and I went back in 1999 to be as a youth leader for the newer kids, and both Tamer and I are on the Global Leadership Council of Seeds of Peace, which is sort of this junior board equivalent. But for me, it really taught me how to look at the world differently, how to really question sort of is there a media bias? I mean, what is the official narrative? What is the unofficial narrative? How do black and white sides get to be defined? And I take this with me, throughout my life, both in, professionally and how I lead negotiations in the global consulting company that I work with, not just with my counterparts in the Arab world or the Middle East, but really around the world. And also personally, in how I choose to raise my children and how I, teach them to question things and dogmas around them. In terms of connecting back to Seeds, we were, I think, the lucky generations where I think there was a huge premium on interpersonal relationships, and we sent faxes to each other, wrote letters, saw each other in person, believe it or not. This was, I returned back home in 1995, and the first few months were exhilarating because I got to go to Ramallah and see the homes of, the people that I shared those bunks with in camp. That euphoria sort of came to a rather sharp close with the assassination of Prime Minister Rabin. But even then, it was just feeling the support of my friends from Seeds of Peace from across the aisle, who came actually and sat with us at Rabin Square, the place where he was assassinated, and really, created this amazing sense of community, which I, to this day cherish and remember. I think fast forward to today and just over the last, several years, I mean, Seeds of Peace is not just about this amazing altering life experience in camp. There are significant sort of programmatic initiatives and efforts back in the regions. The primary focus is Israel, Palestine, Jordan, Egypt, but also Seeds brings together teenagers from India and Pakistan, from Afghanistan. There used to be delegations from Balkans. They thankfully solved that conflict, so they no longer are coming, which is good. And there was also a delegation from both Greek and Turkish Cypriots. And so in each region, there's a program officer. There are follow-up programs for youth, so kids who come back and sort of need this community and place where they can channel sort of more of an idealistic and aspirational view of the world. There are also, I think Seeds learned over the years that not everybody needs to sort of go on to become a political leader. I think a lot of us, and we can maybe touch on this later, went on to sort of different walks of life, from arts to theater to media to business. And Seeds is providing those different program areas, support, that focus on kind of cultivating leadership in those different spaces, and we can maybe talk about, I don't want to monopolize the panel, and I can talk more about this later as well.
So I just want to point out two things, just in case, just to bring everybody up to speed. In November of 1995, Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated, and it changed very much the political landscape in Israel and in the region, because this was one of the architects of the Oslo peace process, and it very much shifted the direction the region went in terms of creating peace, and it began a trajectory that we're really still in. And I wanted to just pull out something before we turn to Mahmoud, which is that I received recently, and it's not yet published, but a 2016 report that was published by the Interagency Task Force in Israel said that, this is a 2015 Rafi Smith survey among 400 12 to 18-year-old Israeli Arabs and Jews found 35% of Jews aged 12 to 18 had never spoken to an Arab youth, and 27% of Arab participants had not spoken to a Jewish counterpart. So you realize this is not just talking about relationships, it's actually never having spoken a word to someone who's on the quote-unquote other side. And this is something that has really increased over time since the assassination of Rabin, and I think that this is where I would like Mahmoud Jabari to pick up a little bit, because Mahmoud is a Palestinian from Hebron, which is in the West Bank, and has seen a great deal of the conflict, to put it mildly, and was a part of, really a witness to the Second Intifada, which very much changed the region, and he is now at the Fletcher School at Tufts. But he's also been a youth advocate and a voice since a teenager. And I want to know what brings you to the idea of wanting to work on this, and how you decided to join this. This is now, we're looking at a decade later after Anna's first experience with Seeds, because obviously they've stayed involved. But why did you come? And one of the things I want to pick back up on with both of you as well is, how did the community receive you upon your return?
It's two questions that are going to tell a long answer. I started to be aware of the political realities that surrounded me and my family in the Israeli army-controlled part of Hebron in a very tough political and security period. The developments of, at that time, the Israeli-Palestinian negotiations had their physical reflections and repercussions right outside of our house, in the form of military curfews, military raids, Israeli settlers' aggression, and even, at the age of 11 or 12, seeing Israeli tanks moving in Hebron's streets at the onset of the Second Palestinian Intifada. So I started to ask these questions at a very early age, questions that continued to evolve, and mainly, the question of why. Why did my family or any other Palestinian family have to endure a life with no sense of safety or dignity or respect? And I think the most important question is, what can we Palestinians do to have a life with dignity and safety? So this chapter of my childhood was very tough, to the extent that I felt a self-imposed sense of national duty to tell the stories and to be the voice of the Palestinian community that I'm from, tell their stories and share their aspirations. And Seeds of Peace, just as an FYI, I wasn't very interested in 90% of the program at the camp. To me, the reason I went to Seeds is the dialogue session. I was there to knock the narrative of the other side down, to share the stories, narratives, and aspirations of the Palestinian community. And it was my first international opportunity to share my voice beyond Hebron's and Palestine's geographic borders, except that it was very difficult that for the first time I had not only to share my voice, but to listen to narratives that are not very common to me. Narratives that are not easily and sometimes never acceptable. So I went to Seeds to represent. Now, to touch on the second part of your question, which is how it was received after, on the one hand, I left camp very motivated, optimistic, and enthusiastic. Now, some in our region might look at this understandably as naive, but believe me, those 3 weeks in Maine are magic. So that very question that I shared at the beginning evolved and became, how can we Palestinians and Israelis collaborate and work together to build a basis, social and economic basis, for what could be a peace that preserves Israel's security, but also enables us to have an independent state of Palestine with full political rights, sovereignty, and dignity. So criticism did come and continues to come from Palestinians who perceive Seeds of Peace as a program that does conflict with, from their point of view, Palestinian national values, out of a position that we should not engage with Israelis as far as Israel remains an occupying power of the Palestinian people and Palestinian land. Now, I don't necessarily agree with that approach. In fact, I believe reaching out and building bridges with the Israeli society is a crucial part of our journey to achieve and fulfill those national goals and political aspirations. And I give credit to Seeds of Peace for enabling me to realize and see that, and not even this, but be able to practice it and be able to live it through these interactions, even though they were difficult and complicated for the most part. However, I remind myself that going to Seeds of Peace is a privilege. I wish it was this transformative opportunity would be accessible to more Palestinians. And I keep in mind that for the majority of the Palestinians, the encounter they have with Israelis is limited to a military checkpoint where they're potential for, where they're subject for potential humiliation and disrespect, military raids, Israeli settlers' aggression. So I keep that in mind, and if Seeds of Peace teaches anything, it does teach us that change comes from listening and working together, even when we have disagreements, as Governor Richardson mentioned earlier this afternoon.
So, and Doron, last but not least, you came the following year. Doron is Israeli. He's 25 and he studies international global studies and business at Brandeis. And you were a part of a LEAD program empowering Israeli teenagers to become the leaders of the future, which you can explain what that means exactly. But I want to know, did you come in as well thinking, I'm going to present my position and it will sway something? Or did you come hoping for dialogue, or how did you come in and why? Why did you come into Seeds, and what? And I want to kind of double back to, I know we're conscious this is a very short panel for given the biggest one of the biggest subjects in the world, but I want to know how it changed each of you a bit, and I know that we've heard a little bit about that, but this is important, I think.
Right. Can you hear me? Yeah? Okay, great. First of all, I know it's a very short panel, so all of you, when you come back tonight, hopefully not during our session, but please go online to our website. It explains all the details, all the technical details about what's happening. But all of the stories that I think my friends and I are sharing today are representative of the bigger community that now is in all over the Middle East, in the States, and many other parts of the world. Personally speaking, I came to camp, same as Mahmoud. I came because I believed in it. And when I say it, I mean I'm right, and all I need is 4 hours with some Palestinians, Jordanians, and Egyptians, and the conflict is done. As you can figure out, it wasn't that simple. But that's, I think, what makes many of us come to camp. We are chosen in a way that the Ministry of Education in many places or local agencies are involved. I'm not saying that they want to hear necessarily only the good things, but there is definitely that expectation that when you come to camp, you will represent your country. And you go inside a room after you have been spending all of your years in Israel or in Palestine, in Jordan, in Egypt, in the United States, with the education that you received from your home and from your school, and that's what you're going on and with. But then that time that you understand that whatever I say, and Mahmoud and I, we have, and all of us, I think, we've been involved in those panels for so many years now, we're not going to convince one another right away. And sometimes the things that we will say are not as comfortable to hear even after camp. But the big moment that camp sort of brings to you is that make one friend moment, the moment that you understand that the enemy has faced, the moment that you understand that if something happens in Gaza or something happens in the West Bank, even if you have rationale for what's happening and you understand the tactic reality and the dangers that exist in the area, you understand that people that you know, that your friends are there. And you reach out and you ask if everything is okay. And to me, that's the biggest understanding that I was able to take from Seeds of Peace. In terms of change, you mentioned in the beginning, actually, many Israelis today just don't speak to Arabs. I come from the great city of Haifa, which is the city of coexistence. I also served my military service in Hebron. Both very different cities, different relationship between Arab and Jews. But I would say that most of the people don't care so much about reaching out. Unlike maybe 93 or 94 or 95, those years that there was some hope, I think many people today have no hope. And that's what makes people just not look even, not try even to talk, not try even to ask questions. And I think that this is why Seeds of Peace is so necessary today. Because it was only because of that summer in Maine that I understood that 4 million people live next to me, that 2 million, or sorry, just about 1.5 million people live within Israel, Arab Israelis, and I didn't know anything about their narrative. And I think that that's an important thing that happens, and I really thank Seeds of Peace for that.
I want to go back to something we talked about in advance of this panel, which is the multiplier effect. And I thought maybe, Tamer, you can speak to that a little bit. Sure. And I also want to emphasize that, remember, when each of these panelists went to camp, they're 13, 14 years old. So it starts very, we're not talking about adults going to camp. It's about, am I wrong?
Right.
Oh, okay. So, I mean, and I think there's something about that. And I want to know what it meant to go at that age, which is an age where you're, approaching adulthood, and, in Jewish tradition, you're an adult at 13, but, we know that that's sort of from antiquity. But it really is.
I don't know. Ask a 13-year-old. They'll
know,
tell you that.
I have an 8-year-old daughter who will tell me she's, anyway. In any case, so let's talk about that a little bit, about what it means to come at this moment. It's a very impressionable moment. It's a moment when we're still a little bit malleable. And is that part of why the impact works? And I want to also address this multiplier question.
Sure. I think the age is selected specifically for that. When Seeds of Peace, the way the selection process works is that they choose kids who are from ages of 13 to 15 max. The idea is that you are old enough to understand the political realities around you, and especially in the Middle East. At age 13, you're already politically aware. You follow the news. You have political discussions. It's a little bit different than other parts of the world. So you know enough. But you're also, and you're mature enough at least to have a conversation, to have dialogue, but not enough that you're set in your ways. And the idea of the multiplier effect, as we're calling it, is that camp only reaches directly the people who go to it. And I think at this point, I don't remember the exact numbers, but I think we have something about 5,000 graduates have gone through the program over the years now. But the idea is really their impact on their communities outside. So for example, when I came back from Seeds of Peace the first year, I had a presentation in my classroom about my experience at Seeds of Peace, what it meant, how it changed my life. There's a whole new narrative out there, guys. That's what I was telling the people, your classmates. A lot of them end up being interested. A lot of them, your family as well, parents, siblings, cousins, it starts to impact all of them, and they start to think in a different way, especially when you have friends from Israel visit me in Egypt and stay at my home, and they meet neighbors who've never met an Israeli before either. So you start to basically have the secondary effect on everyone else around you, and then that starts to play out in whatever field that you're in. In my field, in law, I end up using the skills that I gained in Seeds of Peace in every day at work, and including in the constitutional drafting process, where you have two very, very polar opposites between very religious and very secular, arguing about issues. These kind of skills come in handy to be able to bridge these gaps, even outside of the Seeds of Peace Israeli-Palestinian conflict, so to speak.
So Anna, I want you to speak to this a little bit too, and also about, I know you have children, so, and how this plays out both at work, and also thinking about the next generation, and how this multiplier effect has played out for you. And then maybe we can all also, I don't know, God, we're never gonna have enough time, but I also want to know how you feel that multiplier effect may play a role in a moment, going back to this hope question, this audacity of hope as we were talking about in the green room. When we feel the leadership is not with us in that space, and maybe you can take on that as well.
Sure. And I also wanted to maybe sort of bring to life a little bit about some of the examples of what, speaking of the multiplier effect, what happens to, the different paths that those 5,000, graduates take when they return to their communities. And by the way, returning to the communities is really like when the hardest journey begins. you know, in my personal case, my parents, they still live in Israel. They live in the city of Ashdod, and it's in the south, for those of you who don't know. And every couple of years, it sort of becomes the location for the proxy, war between Hamas and the Israeli Defense Forces, where, through Israel's occupation of, the West Bank and Gaza. I mean, not anymore the occupation, but still, obviously, the control of Gaza. The conflict escalates, and Ashdod, Doron, and the southern part of Israel sort of comes under the target of missiles from the south. So it really is a conflict, every time, because it's the safety of my family, but at the same time, my heart aches for the plight of occupied Palestinian population in Gaza. And so when the discussion, we talked about how, it sort of moved from the interpersonal medium to, using the world of technology and Facebook and Twitter to, it sort of becomes the digital battlefield, so to speak. And there are sides, and you have to take sides, and it's I think for anybody who's gone through the Seeds of Peace process, the program, those sides are never the same. And you feel, I feel as passionately advocating for the human rights in Gaza as much as I care about, my parents' situation in Ashdod. So I think from a personal standpoint, it will always be personal. In terms of, I guess, again, the multiplier effect and the different paths that people take, in the early days, Seeds of Peace sort of had this vision that succeeding in the success was about getting into political office and influencing the policy through sort of cultivating those leaders of tomorrow who will then assume political office and change the world in that way. And I think, very quickly everybody realized that this wasn't going to happen that way. And in fact, Seeds of Peace was cultivating, pun or no pun intended, but those seeds who really bloomed into so many different fields, in art, in theater, in business and music. I was actually, in kind of going back to some of the, the stories from our peers. Ahmed Mansour founded this. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the Humans of New York project. So he founded Humans of Gaza. So those of you who haven't checked it out, I encourage you to do so. Sophia from Kabul founded this whole initiative on women economic empowerment that really looked at young teens and girls in schools and better ways to connect them to future impactful careers. Similarly, there is a really, really impressive young woman in Gaza who, given all the constraints that I think Gazans have today, she tried to look at how to connect people with ICT education skills to employment opportunities, both in Gaza and beyond remotely. There are numerous programs and projects that have been founded by Seeds graduates. There is a program called Gather that Seeds had supported that is actually focused on young professionals, 20 to 25-year-olds, and they really try to foster entrepreneurship, small and medium-sized entrepreneurship development skills, support for startups, support for essentially ways to realize and help solve and look at the conflict from so many different vantage points. So I think that's, to me, is really encouraging. I mean, you asked kind of how I kind of take this. It's personal. I think I spoke earlier about how, for me, it's this notion that that there is a multitude of perspectives and sides, and I always make my 3- and 5-year-old question what they see, why certain things are the way they are, inequality, injustice, why that is. And I would love also for us to ultimately bridge and also talk about the applicability of Seeds of Peace beyond sort of our far away regions, but also to the U.S.
I want to bring that in at the very end, if we can, just so we get in Mahmoud and Doron one more time. But so I actually think there's something interesting about, so of course, social media and Facebook and Twitter and whatever, WhatsApp, everything has linked us. At the same time, it's made everything very busy. What we were talking about in the green room was, with the rise of social media, how we no longer have peripheral reading. Those of us like me that still get a newspaper at home, you see the stories you wouldn't click on because they're there on the page. Whereas if you're reading and the algorithm is constantly shifting and all you're reading, let's say, is Israel-Palestine, and you don't read about Pakistan because that's not what you normally click, and the algorithm shifts for you. So one of the things that seems that Seeds does as well is actually allow you to allow some of that noise to die down and focus in. And I wonder if that was your experience at all.
Well, let me take you back a little bit of, there's transformation that happens at the end of camp, but there's also a long journey of transformation that happens for the few years that follow camp. Because, you go back, and by you here I'm saying any Palestinian who has been to Seeds of Peace, come back to very harsh realities that they encounter every day again. So, it reminds me of what you write in your book about that letter you got from your grandfather and your bat mitzvah, about that now it's an endowment and you have to stand up to that responsibility. And for when you graduate from Seeds, you have two responsibilities: to stand up to the very message that you have on your shoulders now, and also to your commitment toward your own people. And that creates a conflict that, stays for years, especially every time conflict escalates. So, yes, Seeds of Peace teaches us that there is always another narrative, and there is the story behind the obvious and behind the surface that we need to look for at times of peace and war. But social media is not always a force for good, and you see different social media platforms and these Seeds of Peace closed groups on Facebook. They also reflect the escalation that happens on the ground every time there is a war or conflict. However, I don't think that's bad. The very fact that they know we recognize that there is another side that we need to address and talk to, even when we disagree, and the fact that we want to send a message is a very important factor and very important base. That's my personal experience. That's my personal point of view.
Doron, do you want to pick that up, or you?
Yeah, sure. Actually, sorry, it's a bit complicated here. I will go actually starting with the age, and then what happens usually to Israelis. So to me, it pretty much started. I think camp I was about 16, and I loved it. And I think Albert Einstein actually famously said that education is pretty much what you get, or I guess what you get before you become 16, and those assumptions that you get before you turn 16. And that was really the age that I needed. Mahmoud, I hope you don't know her, but I actually fell in love with a Palestinian girl during my camp session. Can tell you that she felt the same thing, but her name was Razan, and really great girl. And I'm saying it not to tell you that Holy Land women...
She's friend with my sister, so I hope it's
No. No, she's great too, but anyway. What I do want to say, however, is that it is a critical age, and it's a critical age because it starts. You go to high school in Israel. You start thinking about where you're going to be in the army. Sometimes older friends that are graduating, they're already in the army. So this is a very critical age to be exposed to that. Soon enough, you're in high school. You're graduating, hopefully doing okay. I did fine. And then you join the army. And that's when the social media becomes your best friend, because what happens in Israeli base is that we're very bored, and that, of course, the situation is not sometimes the easiest for Israeli soldiers too, but usually during routine time, it's pretty normal times, and there is certain routine. And you get bored, and then social media becomes your best friend. Your cell phone is something that you use all the time. And you end up being with your army friends, and you take pictures with your army friends, and the weapons are nearby, and everything is next to you. And you never think about the fact that the people that are in your Facebook, group, or, you're actually just friends with them on Facebook, are Palestinians that might see as offensive. And I sometimes would see the number of friends being dropped after I put a certain picture. That for me, it's completely like just what I was doing that day, and for them, it's like, oh my God, you're in the army, and we really don't like it. to that extent, social media allows seeds to connect a lot of time. We have those closed groups. We're able to share opportunities. I think for all of us, Seeds of Peace changed our lives because it opened so many opportunities for us. And that's why, Seeds are really the best people that I can speak with and tell them about what I am doing, and they tell me about them. And so many different scholarships and jobs are being sort of discovered within the Seeds network. But social network is also a challenge because at times it sort of tells you, yes, I'm still there and I still think very differently. And for some people, it's still a big challenge. And I think that that's something that, we're learning to do more, and we're learning to encourage more active dialogue in social media, but it's still something that we explore. I can say personally that to me, social media is an important platform. I run a page to teach Palestinians Hebrew. So every day, 2 a.m., after I finish my readings in the Brandeis library, I will go home and record something about Hebrew. And while I can't tell you that it transforms all the information or whatever people think about Israel, I allow Palestinians that did not go to camp to meet Israelis, even if it's just online. And I think that that's where we have to be, because we're not going to bring everybody to camp, but we do have to engage everybody, because in the end of the day, this piece is going to include each and everybody back home.
Well, I just went on to address the point that she brought up, which is that obviously that we've been speaking about a specific conflict, but that the lessons and the tools that are offered by Seeds go beyond that and might offer something to us here. And then I want to open it up for questions before we run out of time.
Sure, and I think I would probably not share something completely earth-shattering to you in that, the society in the U.S. is probably polarized to, I think Pew Research on the eve of last year's election talked about how the polarization is probably the highest it has been in decades. Axios, I think quite a few are probably familiar with this new Medium platform, talked about how they released a survey data that 89% of Republicans trust Trump over CNN, while 91% of Democrats feel the opposite. I think from Charlottesville to Ferguson, I don't need to name more cities and more tragedies. I think there is really. I see a tremendous need for a program like Seeds of Peace in the U.S. to help bridge some of the divide. I guess the good news, and it's just a drop in a bucket, of course, but Seeds of Peace has been doing a U.S.-focused program as well. So the organization is 25 years old, but for the last 15 years, because Maine has been the host for the summer camp, Seeds has been both bringing campers from Maine to join the Maine sessions, but also doing follow-up programs with the resettled refugees, with educators in the state, but also sort of in the Northeast. And this year and the previous year, they piloted sort of teenage youth dialogue programs in Syracuse, in New York, in Chicago, and LA. And the hope is for those dialogue programs and groups to continue. It's just a different, I think, coin from, to borrow from sort of the coexistence and, division sessions that we have at Seeds. It is about making that one friend. It is about challenging people to understand what the reality might be like for somebody who is less privileged, less fortunate, somebody who comes from a different background. And doing this at a very impressionable teenage age where you feel incredibly passionate about your ideals, about your friendships, in a way that hopefully will carry forward and make us a more, better society.
Well, I feel like I have a million more questions for this panel, but I know I want to give the audience a chance to ask some questions as well. So I know there's a mic in the back. I don't know if, is it? Yeah, okay.
Is this on?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. I'm Barry Boyer from Worcester, Massachusetts. I've been a contributor to Seeds of Peace since it started.
Thank you.
And you're welcome. I get the impression that you all feel very privileged to have participated in the program. So my question has to do with the responsibility that comes along with privilege. It's very nice to hear that you're networking about job opportunities, teaching your children to be good listeners, helping with the Egyptian constitution, but is there any feeling among the alumni of a collective responsibility to work on the issues that are larger and more political in that region of the world?
I'm happy to take that question.
I would say shortly, and I'm sure if somebody else would like to add, 100%. I mean, all that work that we do together, all the sharing content, sharing information, all of that comes from the idea that we do have to be the voice that calls for peace. The good thing about Seeds of Peace, at least among the Israeli delegation, is it's very diverse. So you get a lot of people from different sides. You even get, settlers. You get people that think differently. But in the end, that camp does something to all the people. So within Israel, Seeds of Peace graduates have established programs in Israeli universities that are called Wachat al-Achat, which means one-on-one in Hebrew and Arabic. And Israeli Arab students and Israeli Jewish students come together and speak. We also have a lot of programs with people that are currently in the army. I think every seed sort of looks back and says, how can I give back to the community of Seeds of Peace and to the greater community? So there is 100% commitment to do more. It is hard, of course, but one sentence that we keep saying is, they tried to bury us, but they didn't know that we were seeds. And together we are working to make sure that we can transform reality together. So 100% commitment, and hopefully we'll see change.
Hi, my name is Mary. I'm from World Boston, and just a comment. Initially, I'd like to say I really salute your courage for doing the quiet and generally unseen work of friendship. This friendship takes courage. So thank you for that commitment, wherever friendship takes you. So I do have a question, going from that to the geopolitical. The image of the United States, the standing of the United States has changed a lot since the Oslo Accords. Does it impact the success of the program that the program is located in the United States? Thank you.
I can speak a little bit to that because also having been with the program since '93, you've seen a changing role for the U.S. over the decades, not even just recently. And what I can say is that I don't think it affects the program that much. I think it might in some perceptions, and I think it probably might have different opinions here, but in my mind at least, it hasn't, nor does it affect it. The reason for that is the whole point of Seeds of Peace is that it's not enough to look to the governments, or let's say whatever it is, besides whatever it is the governments are doing, whether in the region or in the US, the real peace is not going to happen unless you have peace between people. Egypt and Israel have had a peace treaty since 1979, but publicly, most Egyptians have never met an Israeli, nor do they support the concept of normalization with Israel. The idea is to establish these connections on people-to-people level. So that applies in the region, but it also applies with the US. When we come to camp in the US and you meet the staff of Seeds of Peace and counselors and stuff, one of the things you learn quickly is whatever perceptions and stereotypes you had about America, which are equally strong and not always very well informed, are also not true, because you're going to meet Americans also for the first time, and you meet them and you see a whole diversity of backgrounds and opinions and so on. So you feel that sense of connection to the people and the place rather than the administration at the White House at the time.
And just maybe one point to add, I think that the reason it has worked so well with the camp being hosted in Maine, and it could have been as well hosted in Colorado or elsewhere, and if you guys, if any of your chapters want to host seats, talk to us afterwards, but is because US does, through administrations, through political change, provides this sort of impartial broker opportunity and convener. And that's why I think if Seeds of Peace was attempted to be held in Israel or in Jordan or in Egypt, I think there would be that sort of perceived bias, and the fact that those kids are brought into a summer camp in this third location in a country that really champions a lot of the values that I think Seeds of Peace believes in, and I think those values transcend politics, and it's not about who's in the White House, but it is, I think America is still very much the beacon on the hill for many countries around the world, and so in that regard, I think, it worked really well.
Oh, one behind me. My name is Pierce Powers. I'm the president of the World Affairs Council in St. Louis, Missouri. First, I'll introduce this institution, and probably you know about it. Bethlehem University in Bethlehem. It's sponsored, actually Pope John the 23rd set this up. It's sponsored by the Catholic bishops of the world. And many Palestinians attend. Their population of students is 70% Muslim, 70% women. The only reason I'm saying that is they have Christian brothers all over the U.S. Have you reached out to them at all? It's a beacon of light in Bethlehem, in Palestine. It's a university. So, the question. Reach out if you have. I'll teach you
We'll
how to
definitely
get there.
take this back.
Within my limited knowledge of the organizational activities and reach out on behalf of, at the end of Seeds of Peace, I know they reach out to the civil society at large in Palestine to recruit campers, from high schools. But there are the educator programs. There's, the counselors who, come from, the university students' age group. So it is open to Bethlehem University and other universities. Seeds of Peace has a permanent office in Jerusalem where Israeli and Palestinian staff work together, and they collaborate with with members of the civil society organizations, individuals, and other people.
But we'll definitely take your suggestion back to the organization. While we I think represent the graduates, I think each of us also has a day life and job, but we're very connected with the organization, and we'll definitely take your helpful suggestion back.
Thank you.
Jim Hill from Inland Southern California. My question is, having gone through this experience of seeing different perspectives, and especially seeing, as you phrase it, the other side, how do you think things are going to work out? Or do you make any predictions, or do you want to just stay away from that? Or do you have any ideas about how the shape of any peace settlement might look? Gee, thanks.
You've got 4 minutes.
I will say, first, I think we are all, after camp, and that also connects to the commitment point, you keep thinking about what's happening, and I think that opens your eyes, and you care. Like I know personally, I know Mahmoud, we really care about what's going on, and hopefully we plan to be involved in politics. I'm sure Mahmoud will succeed, I don't know about myself. But, in a way, getting your hands dirty, I think that's the only way to do something. You can predict whatever you want, and in Israel, demographics-wise, I can tell you, it looks like the right wing, more religious families, that seems to be more majority, Arabs becoming, increasing number. So it looks like society will just be polarized. But as we know, and I think 2016 election, whatever happens in politics is always can be very surprising. So I can't tell you exactly what politics will look like, but what I can say is that if good people choose to go and be involved in local initiatives, that's what can do a lot of good things. Personally speaking, I was able to intern this summer in the West Bank. I was working with settlers. Their image in the media, in Israeli media, in international media, is usually not the best. Those settlers, many of them that made Aliyah came to Israel from the United States, have chosen to do things a bit differently. They have a center that allows Palestinians and Israelis to work together. The center was established by both Palestinians and Israelis. I taught them Arabic because it was important to them to reach out to the Palestinian communities nearby. So what I think is important is that people don't say the settlers are A, B, or the Palestinians are A, B. This conflict has a lot of different people with different approaches, and only if we are able to engage all of them, we can really make something work.
Can I make a comment? So since this is public, I have to make a disclaimer that I disagree with Doron here about changing the settlers' image in the media. They're an obstacle to establishing an independent Palestinian state. But to go back to your question, I think the environment is very difficult. I worked for full-time last year in between my first and second years in grad school at the Office of the Quartet in Jerusalem. The situation is very difficult. However, I wake up every morning and try to guide myself by, a quote by a favorite Palestinian leader, former Prime Minister Salam Fayyad, who says, to be a Palestinian, you have no choice to be optimistic or not. Optimism is a conscious decision making and conscious, you're determined to be optimistic. What we need to see, I think, in Palestine, in the midst of this difficult environment, is an inclusive, representative, and creative leadership. And I think we Palestinians, whatever the U.S. Vision of peace is or Israel's vision of peace, we need to come together and agree on one vision. What do we want to accomplish? How do you want our state, our institutions, our society to look like? And ask ourselves how each one of us can contribute to such vision beyond our ideological and political divides. And there is sources to be optimistic too, even though they are less than the reasons to be pessimistic. But you have 30% of the Palestinian society is 15 to 29-year-old. 79% of them, according to recent study, believe that the priority is to build a state, and the second priority is to improve living situation. So there is an opportunity there. Well, we need to unite and work together.
Tamer, are you hopeful? Given you've watched this program since '93, do you feel like this is an incubation that will allow peace and a future of coexistence, or are you at a bleaker moment?
I have no doubt that there's a lot of hope for the program and for what the program can accomplish. Now, the political realities on the ground have changed and gone up and down multiple times in the past 25 years. And I can tell you that when we first came from camp in '93 and there was the Oslo Accord signing and things looked really, really promising, at the time we thought, okay, that's great, things are going in the right trajectory, but as soon as things started to get worse on the ground, there was a lot of doubt at the time. Doesn't make sense for us to continue to be involved. Do we care about the peace process? Is there ever going to be a peace? Pretty soon, as I think it was Doron who said earlier, it becomes clear that it becomes more necessary. A program like Seeds of Peace becomes more necessary when it is a bleaker moment in politics. Because if things are going great with the governments, we won't need programs like Seeds of Peace. So for us, whether things are going well or not so well, our program is still accomplishing its goals by actually us building these relationships, and basically our bet is on that 79% or whatever the statistic is in each one of our countries, that you have a much broader base of a younger generation that thinks about these things very differently. And on the youth level, we've all started to take matters into our own hands, so to speak, by building these bridges, by establishing programs, whether on the politics side or business, art, or so on, so that we don't have to wait. By the time our generation is the one that's in leadership, I think, and I'm hopeful, that it will become a lot more likely and a lot more feasible to have a sustainable peace in the region.
Okay, unfortunately, this brings us to the end of this fascinating panel, which I could talk to this crowd for another hour, but I'm really appreciative of you letting me be your interlocutor, and thank you so much to each of you for sharing your thoughts.
Thank you.
Thank you.